There's one thing that I really, really, really hate about triggers, and I want to talk about it. Before I tell you what it is, I should say there's a lot of things that I can work with triggers. I wouldn't say that I like every trigger, but I can work with most of them. Um, See, with the Glock here, relatively long throw, not a super defined wall generally, and then you press right on through. Most people don't consider the Glock triggers very good, as far as like the pull it like do is it good to pull? Like most people no, they don't really like the Glock triggers. They'll say, hey, it's too long of a pull, it's too spongy, it's too heavy, not a defined wall, whatever. People people have all sorts of different opinions. And like I said, being honest, I can roll with any of that stuff. Now, if it's a double single gun, like a Beretta or a CZ, like those are fine. You've just got that long double action throw for the first shot. Then after that, the trigger press is typically light and easy. On the CZs, for example, there's a very defined wall, but there's a little take up before you get to it, unless you modify it some more and blah, 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 right on down the rabbit hole if you want to go there. The one thing that I really hate on triggers, like I can't stand it, is when there's a let off. So what do I mean by let off is typically the pressure stays even or stacks up a little bit. So as I press through here, like I'm okay with the trigger stacking or adding pressure as I take it up. I can roll with that. Back in my Tanfolio days, I remember talking to Frank Garcia, right when I was getting on Team 10 Folio. He's like, yeah, it takes up, but you'll get used to it and you'll like it. And I was like, dry firing the Tanfolio, which does it like the double action mode has a pretty aggressive take up or a stacks up aggressively. And it was like, I was like, oh man, like that's kind of weird. But he was right. Frank was right about that. And working with the pistol a little bit, I grew to like the stacking on the trigger, where it's like stack, 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 boom, then eventually it goes off. I like that. The let off though, if there's a let off, that I can't tolerate that. Like that is so much harder for me to shoot well when I'm shooting at speed. So what do I mean let off? So let's say the pressure goes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pounds, then right at the end it goes 654. Like the pressure required on the trigger reduces like after you hit a certain point. And that's usually after the trigger is going to break with most of these things. Like it's about to break, it's like, oh, it needs way less pressure. Um, yeah, the let off I think is very challenging to shoot well. Why? Why do I think that? Okay, so let's say I'm on the trigger here, but I'm not in my preferred hand position. My preferred hand position's here. Let's say I rotate it over slightly. I'm not quite perfectly in line with this thing like I normally would be. As I stack up pressure, pressure, pressure on the trigger, I can feel like, in a sense, as I press into the trigger, I feel the resistance, and it's like the trigger is pressing back into me. I mean, it's not really, but it feels like that, right? Because it's the pressure's building on the trigger, and I can feel what's happening again as I stack that pressure up. And like I said, it's almost like the trigger's pushing back into me, and that gives me a feel for what I'm doing. Eventually it breaks, boom, and the gun goes off. Now, if there's a big let off, so the pressure stacks up, stacks up, stacks up, then eventually it lets off towards the end and there's less pressure, then right at the end of the trigger press, it's like I lose connection or I lose feeling for what my finger's doing. And if I'm not pressing the trigger perfectly straight back, it's like, ooh, when it lets off, like that's usually when I'm gonna push the gun and send it somewhere, somewhere that I don't want it to go. But that's just me. Now, like I said, I've got a pretty flexible style. I can shoot a lot of different trigger systems really well. But the the one thing I just hate it is when there's a let off. Really don't like it.